Hello, everyone. Welcome to Authentic BS Conversations with Coaches. And I have with me today my coach, mentor, friend, Brian Baird from The Authentic Way. So, would you like to come back, Brian?
Do I come back to what now?
That was my cue to wrap things up.
Oh, we're done? Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to come back on your show. Yeah, we have
All right.
that was
Do you want to
the
start?
most amazing conversation I've ever had.
All right. You want to start that over? Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my show, Authentic BS Conversations with Coaches. I am your host, Dustin Payne, and with me today is Brian Baird. He is my coach, mentor, and friend, and we've been on this journey together for at least 4 years, I believe. I could be
July
off.
of it's actually 5 years in July,
Wow.
believe it or not.
Don't don't ask me to remember our anniversary.
I don't have an exact date. Let's just pick July 13th. But I don't have an exact date. But that's when we first met. I was at a convention out there and we bumped into each other and had a great conversation.
Where was
So,
that? That was in Seattle
Seattle.
at the time.
Yep.
How did you meet me?
You were driving me around.
Yes, I was a distinguished Uber driver at the time.
You inspired me
So,
though. You inspired me though, because when I was looking for a way to conduct a lot of interviews for one of my books, it was not exact. It actually turned out to be the best way to meet people in volume to do interviews around my material. And so I took my BMW. I got it authorized to use on one of the rideshare companies. I would tell you, nobody should ever do that to make money. You probably know that more than anybody, but
yeah.
it's more like just churning money. It's not really making money, but let's just put that aside for the moment. Because not, so putting that aside, I wasn't doing it for the money, although, you know, I used it for my daughter's college and all that stuff. But the best part about that was nearly 3,500 conversations. I started out for only do 500, and then I changed some of my material, so I tested in the next 500, and then I refined it one more time. But in addition, I kind of got hooked on talking to people. I don't
Yeah.
know what your experience was doing that, but I love meeting people. And if I was ever to do something like that again, assuming that automated cars don't take over the entire job, which they probably will anyway, but if the human beings are still allowed to do that someday in the future, and I just want to just go out and have a social thing, I think it's an extraordinary way to meet people. So
I agree.
none of them are long term. Well, you turned out to be long term, but
Yeah.
a few of them are long term. You just get to meet people where they are and have just an amazing experience with them, and it was beautiful when when I just simply asked, "Can I share with you material I'm working on for one of my books?" And they said, "Sure," almost with one or two exceptions. Sure, absolutely. And then when I shared with them the material, they were just a couple of about actually quite a number of times, probably about a third of the time, I got this. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that today.
Mhm.
That's what inspired me to keep on going. Like, not only was I testing the material, maybe even refining it, not too much though. Didn't After a while, it was just using the material, but to watch how people registered with this like moment of, maybe I will even call it kind of peace and awakening. Like, you have no idea how much I needed to hear that today. And in many ways, I got hooked on hearing that. When I heard that, is huge confirmation for the body of work I was building. And it was also a huge confirmation for me about humanity. that humanity is by and large good, and just everybody wants and needs connection.
Exactly. Yeah. I noticed that when I was doing the same thing, that I wasn't coming at it with a goal in mind. I was just more or less, I enjoyed meeting new people, finding out where they were from, what they're into, and what they're doing. And yeah, it was amazing. It was, that's like you said, that's how we met. And so there were some really powerful connections there. It's really incredible. So
Yeah, I think if you remember at the time, I had a woman journeying with me at the time also, who I thought was going to be my long-term partner in every regard. And at the moment, it looked like it was going to go that way. But
right.
the best part of it is I got of the two of you who are in the car for some of those conversations, I got the best end of the deal. Will you still be journeying with me?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, the other person just turned out to be my lesson. Another one.
Well, life is full of lessons.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I fixed the camera here. So
yeah. Well, I just do want to say that this is my first coaching with or conversations with coaches show, and I chose to share that with you because we have been on this journey together for such a long time, and Brian's actually been doing another show with me called Dead Guys Talking, where it's sort of my journey from, what do I really want to do? How do I want to serve the world, to kind of me becoming a life coach and getting myself out there basically amongst the world. So this was an idea that I had kind of brewing, and I asked Brian to help me put it together. And I thought, what better person to learn about their history and what inspired them to become a coach than my very own coach. So I thank you for being my first guest. And
it's my pleasure, by the way. So
yeah, I'm curious to know how it all began, how you got your superpowers.
oh gosh. Well, it all started in a window pane-free hospital in New Mexico. That's the story. But I was born in New Mexico. My mother was a transplanted New Yorker. She had gone out there to go to, for whatever reason, she picked going out there to go to study her languages and education and all these other things she was doing. She met my father. My father has lots of interesting stories I could tell another time, but it's just like somehow or other he charmed her enough, and they got married, and she stayed in New Mexico. And in many ways, for years, because of how my father was so, I describe him historically as a rageaholic. Recently, I got a different descriptor for him, and I can just say is the protagonist in a powerful journey for me. But he was easy to ire, fragile ego, narcissistic energy, sociopathic, lied about everything for no reason, just made stuff up just to make himself look better. And I don't know. Sometimes the stuff he would say would be like mind blowing, because I'd be there for many of those conversations. So, and at the time, not every time could I recognize that he was making stuff up, because I was still a kid. But I remember some of the stories, like my father talking to people about how he broke the land speed record at Bonneville Flats. I was even kind of thinking, yeah, when did that happen? Even I was maybe only 6 years old when I having this thought in my head, like, what is he talking about?
Right.
So, but the thing that was the other thing, so he's this malignancy in how he traveled around the universe to sort of soothe his ego and all the tortures he was going through. I look back on it and say I can see that now, but at the time, it was a very fractious relationship because I was always the target when he went into a rage if I was in the room. And he loved the belt. And he would wear these very wide belts because it was kind of the hip thing to do in New Mexico in the 60s, was these wide cowboy belts. And he would take that belt off and weigh the tar out of me. I can't tell you how many times I had welts on my legs and my butt and all those other things. And so if I say, believe it or not, that is part of my superpower. You know, you sit there and go, look, oh, that's such a non-positive story. But it's like, I'm very grateful today for how he showed up then. He's gone now. He's been gone since 1998. So December 98. So the thing is that when you are the parent, I mean, when you're the child of a parent who is narcissistic and malignantly so, you have a couple of choices. You can stay in a punching bag posture, kind of victim state, or you could become an all protective energy, just like the narcissist you're being parented by. So in my particular case, in my journey, I was probably a little bit of both. And I actually technically would say anybody who's a narcissistic energy is also a victim of sorts. So, and you look at, I'm sure I'm going to upset a lot of people in the political world, but this is part of the conversation, but you look at our recent president, who clearly shows up in the pattern of the malignant, sociopathic, narcissistic energy. And then you hear the stories about how his father was. You can see how it can create the patterns.
Right.
So for me to survive, and I will tell you that narcissism is kind of like the ultimate survival tool. Like it's not a thriving tool. It's just the ultimate survival tool. And I say it's the ultimate one because you can't even imagine that you're ever wrong. You know, you can't admit any frailties or other challenges. It's a very fragile energy, and it's a very scared individual, and it's a very, underneath the hood is a very dark less than posture.
Yeah.
So and although they're not conscious of it, and I would say for decades I operated in this place of not even being conscious of this fragile energy. All I knew is that I was always right. Thankfully, in some ways, because I was in the spaces of technology and selling and all these other things, thankfully capable in so many ways to, even though it was kind of a huge arrogance thing to always be right. But that's, when you look at somebody who's always arrogant this way, you're going to have a really keen understanding that probably if they're arrogant, they're also probably protecting themselves in a kind of an at all costs way. And that some of the protection is from others. Some of that protection is from others finding out who you really are, because that's again a hidden posture inside of that fragile ego. So somebody's going to figure out who I really am. Mm-hmm. Which is why you gaslight the hell out of everybody, or you lie about things, and gaslighting and lying often get bundled anyway, and then you do all these other things, and and so anyway, for the early decades of my life, even including a 24-year marriage and a host of other things, I operated very heavily in that protective sphere of painting how I wanted to be seen, making stories up if I needed to make that story work, because that's what would make me at least feel like I could survive. Although I would, on at all accounts, I looked like I was surviving. I had two, all the cars, a big house, beautiful wife, a kid, um, money in the bank. But those things started to change too. The marriage started to wither. I mean, my now ex-wife lost the shine off off me, so to speak, and the shine off our marriage. Only took a little while. By the time we were married 24 years, and by the time the 4-year mark had come along, I think we were now on a 20-year slide. How we made it to 24 years isn't clear. And I guess just both of us just didn't want to admit failure, didn't want to throw in the towel. I don't know, but there was the writing was on the wall, certainly long before the divorce.
Right.
So anyway, that's so this may sound very non-positive, but the fact is here's the beautiful part about things. If you're willing to awaken, if you're able to and willing to awaken and start receiving a different view of life than being always shields up. Maybe, just maybe, you can get tired of being shields up. It's very exhausting to always be protective.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Maybe, just maybe, you can just take that energy and put it aside and kind of take inventory of what's really going on. And just maybe you have the luxury of shifting. And that's the course of my work. So many, there's two things. Most of my clients happen to be female who have been victims, if you want to use that word, I put that in quotes, victims of this narcissistic energy, whether it's parents, boyfriend, husband, whatever the case may be. A few of my clients are energies who have been evolving from the narcissistic spectrum. So now I'm firmly of the opinion that many people, especially if they're way down on the malignant end of that protection of the fragile ego, will go to their grave that way. It's not, I don't have high hopes of changing everybody who's narcissistic. I just think if somebody is kind of just north enough or just right enough on the spectrum, or whatever the case you want to think, that there's a possibility that they can awaken and shift and have robust, high quality, beautiful lives without that high level of protection required. And here's the cool part. Right. All that protection is not authentic. So that's one of the reasons why it's just pure survival. True happiness, or I'm going to use the distinguish between happiness and joy. Happiness are kind of like externally induced effects. We didn't get hit by the meteor. I'm happy about that. I just got a $10,000 check. I'm happy about that. Just went on vacation. I'm happy about that. But when you can actually look inside and not need to be protecting yourself all the time, and not being able to, not having to live in regrets all the time, or any other energies that may be conscious or unconscious, all that exhausting stuff I just kind of alluded to before. I didn't really fully describe it, I just alluded to it. But when you finally get into that place where you can sort of be yourself and love who you are and be meaningfully connected to people in high quality ways and all those other things, instead of showing up self-serving and protective and all these other things that go along, then you end up experiencing joy, which I think is an internal thing. Okay. So I just rattled on all that for you.
No,
that's my, and in many ways that's my origin story. Without going to all the things so far, I mean, we may ask, when did I get to see changes or all that stuff, but that's the sort of the broad story.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you for sharing. I do have one question. You mentioned the exhausting part. So we all know, you can lead a horse to water, can't make them drink. That's, you talk about not being able to, a lot of people take this to their grave, that you can't change everyone. And there has to be a certain there has to be a certain level of them wanting to change themselves for there to be any change. Otherwise, nothing will happen. You're just beating your head against the wall. So, what is, would you say it's probably different for everyone, but would you say like the fact that it is so exhausting to maintain that the facade, or maybe it's just what is it do you feel that eventually gets through to the people who wake up to it? Is it other people suffering by their what they are doing?
I don't think
Um,
there's a one single answer to this thing.
yeah.
So, like, if I look at my own journey, there was not like there were not instant or an instant like, oh, here I am, wake up.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
I will say though, the magic is in the self-awareness. And a lot of people aren't very good at self-awareness.
Yeah.
I think you can learn. I think it can be taught to you. So that's kind of where the leading a horse to water might be really prevalent. It says, how can you help somebody get to that place? Because you're not going to be able to make them aware. It's like, you know, at a certain point, anything you keep pushing somebody to do, it's going to become feed more of their resistance and more of their protective energy. So you're not going to get anywhere. And in fact, I just had an experience with the assistant without going into details, but I was a family member I invited to join for dinner, and it turned into a blowout after dinner because the person has remained in that fragile ego space. And when I say a blowout, like I'm not carrying around any anger or anything like that. I just said, I can't do this. So I firmly believe that family member is going to go to their grave frozen in their protection mechanisms. And the reason why it was a blowout is because they did something that I had to call them out on, and they tried to gaslight me. And of course, I'm an expert on gaslighting because I've been there and done it myself. So I'm
Yeah.
not having it. You're violating all the boundaries. so so anyway, um, so not you can't make somebody self-aware. Even though I really earnestly last night when I was doing this, I tried to figure out a way to have this conversation with some degree of boundary setting, but compassion included, because they're frozen, scared little boys trapped inside of fragile ego men, that kind of thing, and it just the gaslighting just went full time. It was the automatic response for that individual. So, but there were like, just to go back, how did I get this opportunity to become self-aware? And maybe, just maybe, because of where I was on the spectrum, I was close enough to that line that it was easier for it to happen. But it wasn't a one event. Oh, I see the light. It wasn't like one of those. Although I think those could happen too.
I believe that does happen. In a lot of cases, it comes through sickness, but this may be just a person who is not even a narcissist. That's that kind of awakening that a lot of our spiritual
Right.
leaders kind of go through.
Hmm.
But I agree with you with my own journey. It's not a one-off thing. I mean, in a way that would be kind of nice, I feel,
Get
but
it over with.
who knows? Get it over with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's not easy. It can be
Just
very
rip the Band-Aid
uncomfortable.
off.
Yeah. It can be very uncomfortable going through awakening, because then you
Yeah.
get, because I think in the initial stages, especially if you came through the journey I went through, the initial stages can actually have a self-loathing. Like, oh, I'm an F up. I'm a
Yeah.
failure. I'm a liar. I'm not who I said I was. I'm down on myself. It's not really about others either. It's just like, so there was a part of my journey where I was really having to regroup.
Yeah.
because I was not, once you get to a certain point of self-awareness, you really can't go back, although you can get
Mhm.
stuck at a new spot. So you can't go back to being completely oblivious, protective, curated experience, fragile ego, narcissistic type energy. You can't become unconscious once you're conscious, so to speak, short of death, I guess. But
Right.
as a human being, by the way, who knows what the next iteration can hold. So so I had these door openings that took place,
Mhm.
and I've been, because of the book I'm writing on this sort of gatewaying effect to awareness, I have had to take stock in what was it that woke me up in my journey, because although I was never as volatile nor as violent, physically violent, as my father, I was indeed still volatile and verbally violent, because gaslighting is the violence of kinds. When you try to make somebody else look wrong or feel wrong when they in fact were right, just so you don't have to be wrong, that's a kind of violence. So it's certainly a violation if somebody doesn't want to call it violence. It's certainly a huge violation. You're not honoring the other person. You're frankly not even honoring yourself. This is just the whole aspect of that kind of energy in your life. You're really not an honorable person, because you can't. The only thing you can honor is that sense of safety that comes from protection. And that's a
Mhm.
fear-based thing. So I'd say, I've come up to all these mechanisms for trying to figure out where can an energy be positive and non-positive, what makes the distinction, because you can protect yourself without gaslighting, you can protect yourself without um, without um, resorting to violence, or you can protect yourself without stepping on boundaries of sorts, or whatever those things are that might have happened before. And so what's the difference? One is it's an act of love, that kind of protection. So self-care is a protection. Stepping away from knuckleheads is kind of self-care, and it's not, you don't have to, you could be angry. Maybe somebody in a parking lot just caught it, maybe like last arguing with the family member. They broke boundaries, all kinds of things happen in a very, very short period of time, like almost instantly. and and so some of my energy, I'm not totally pleased with how I handled every aspect of this interaction, but I'm pretty good with most of it. We're always works in progress and always have room to learn. We get the fix on the camera there. Excuse me. Let me see if it can come back here. There we go. So anyway, with that interaction, it was a lot about boundaries and things that I just needed to set it. Whether or not the person was going to honor them was another story. I don't expect them to be properly honored, yet I made it clear there will be consequences for not honoring the boundaries. That's part of what even made it get worse, because I said, if you're not going to honor my request, then just bear in mind the next time this happens, it won't go so smoothly for you. So
Right.
the and that person in that protective place, all they heard was threat. And
Right.
so they started to get more volatile and more angry and more, whatever the case may be. Perhaps I should have known better. Perhaps I just should have just gotten up and walked away and just left it at that. I'm pretty much at this place where it's like, I don't want to just leave boundaries unsaid, like undeclared. So so that's why it kind of got out of control, out of hand in many ways. But it didn't turn into some parking lot brawl, but there was some engagement, let's put it that way. Not physical, but there was engagement. So, but you know, the reason why I bring that up is because um, when you can't be wrong, you can't be seen as weak. In fact, it's even worse than not being seen as being seen as wrong. It's like you must always be seen as perfect or right and powerful and invincible, and brilliant, and you know there's a lot of really, and what ends up happening is a certain person of the population will adore you for that, and other parts of the population will revile you because they'll see you as arrogant and vampire sucking energy and all these other things, and because it's all about you, it's all about serving that thing. So in my case, the wake up calls were kind of gradual and came along. So one of the things, there may be others that will come to me as I keep on writing the material, because I'm creating this, it's not a tome, but it's a self-help trilogy, and this is the first installment of the trilogy that talks about how to migrate to the place of awareness and to get just to get enough exposure to joy to know you want more. That's where I'm taking the book. So, and my father died in '98, December '98. Now, I had, for my own self-protection, ceased to engage him for probably 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned later on that that wounded him. And part of me probably wanted to, it wounded him.
Okay.
And in many ways, I wanted to wound him. So when I just cut him off, and and I think some of the wound was he no longer had any power over me, which is part of his curated image.
Right.
So that had to be a wound of sorts right there, is that suddenly there was a rip out of his image thing, that his son no longer wanted to look at him, engage him, talk to him, but nothing. So about 15 years after that estrangement, he reached out to me, and I don't know why I took the call, because in the past I would ignore them. But sometimes we get nudges from the universe, and you don't know why you do certain things. So I took the call, and he said, I'm coming to New York. I'm going to go to Memorial Sloan Kettering. I have some cancer I need to take care of, and I'd love to at least his favorite thing was to make tacos for everybody. But there was not any way I was letting that man into my home. So, I just said, look, we can meet at a Mexican restaurant if you want to have tacos, but that's about the best I can do right now. So, so I did get together with him. I wouldn't say he was ever contrite, but he was affected. And I got to tell you a little now of the side stories, because my father was so sociopathic about every conversation you ever had with him. So you never knew what the truth was. In fact, I've recently found out other things that I had come to believe for some reason, but it turned out to be a lie. It has to do with my genetic testing that took place that I did a few years ago. And I won't go into all the details of that now, but there's some stuff that I was told there was zero of it. So, it's like, why would he lie about that? Like, who knows what was going on in that man's head sometimes? But because he had, everywhere we went when I was a kid, and we did travel together. My parents got divorced when I was not quite 9 years old, so I went with my mother and my brother back to New York, where she came from, and then he moved to Virginia from New Mexico. So I would see him periodically, and once in a while we would travel. And because when you're a kid, you just kind of don't know to write anybody off. You don't usually do that. So you give everybody chances and over again. So we did spend time with my brother, and I did spend some time with my father. And eventually, I even opted to go live with him when I was in my mid-teens. I was 15 years old, 14, 15, something like that. Which begrudgingly my mother let me do. And I think that's part of the reason why, I got exposed to things that kind of maybe bubbled around for my awakening. Because I did see the lies. I did see the graft or the con that was he was all about. And I learned to hate it to the point where like almost hating the man, or maybe actually hating the man. So anyway, he died in 1998. And people he had in contact with apparently got my number somehow or other. Because even after he'd been at Memorial Sloan Kettering, I didn't really keep any steady engagement with him. We'd periodically talk like twice a year or something. In his last year of life, he seemed more, actually, I won't say he did acts of contrition, but he seemed more willing to kind of like try to make amends for his behavior. So as I said, these are the kinds of things that makes you wonder, although dollar short and a day late in human frame, but maybe it was one of those things that gave me an unconscious sign that, oh, maybe, this part of me who's not happy, and I'm already now married, and the relationship has a few things, the guardrails are coming down, some other issues coming up. At this point, we're married enough years that the marriage is in trouble. And so my then wife and I went to a memorial service that was held by these friends that he had. And they had such beautiful things to say about him. And it wasn't false. Like, how sometimes like people can only go to a service and say only positive things, even though they hated the son of a gun or whatever the case may be. And there probably were people who hated the son of a gun, but they weren't there at the service because they were remembering the older version of my father. So these were people that he had been engaging with in his last few years. And one of the stories I heard, I'm going, this is not the man I knew. This is the guy who would take money out of my wallet and tell me I owed him. He would take money for a job and never do the job. That kind of stuff. He was always on grifting, conning, and, he'd borrow money from people and never pay them back. This kind of thing is like, and I have to say some of that energy had filtered into my thing, is where sometimes when it came to things like money, I was probably situationally flexible. I might do something today I would never consider, but back then, because in some ways, when you're a fragile ego, like, let me get the picture fixed here. I'm sorry about all that. So I have this camera that keeps self-adjusting. So one of the really interesting things that was in there was he had painted a church that was in financial trouble and couldn't really afford to do the work. Now, they probably could have painted the church with people who were at the church, but my father said, I'll do it out of his own time and money.
Oh, wow.
And that's not a man I knew. Right. The man I knew would say, I can do it for you for $400, take the $400 and skip, find another church. So it's like, that to me was a little bit at the unconscious level. Now I look at it as that I think I kind of registered, oh, he changed. You can change. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Like, that's what registered at that moment. I didn't apply it to myself in a conscious way, but I think in some way it registered. And I think that was one of the door openings. So There were others. Like we could spend days talking about this stuff. There were other little subtle things that happened along the way. Probably the one of the biggest things though was the my wife and I were not conceiving, probably because we were so stressed in our relationship. You know, it wasn't happening naturally. We tried a few things. Some of the stuff made things worse. You know, because some doctors are happy to prescribe stuff. You know, and that some of that stuff because very non-positive
Right.
experiences. So one of my wife's friends was going, "Hey, we're adopting a little girl from China." Now, this is a really strange thing because when I was younger, thought, and I didn't want to be a parent, by the way. So that's a whole different story. I never wanted to be a parent, but I met this woman who I married who wanted kids, and before I married her, I had to have a kind of come to religion self-talk discussion and go, you know what? It's not that I don't want kids. It's just I don't want to compete with them. I don't want to be responsible for them. I don't want to mess them up the way I got messed up. So I'm just going to orbit, because one of the reasons for not having kids was to break the pattern. There was a conscious discussion in my head. It's that I am never going to do to some other kid that which was done to me. And I saw parenting as a cyclical thing, which it can be. You can see,
Oh yeah,
so many people go, I promise never to be like my mom. And sure enough, you know, so there are patterns that we can not only pass on, but they will pass on too.
yeah,
So,
yeah, very easily.
So where am I going with this long story here? So we adopt a little girl from China.
Okay.
Now, here's my philosophy was as we were adopting, we're getting close. And by the way, I put off having a kid in the marriage for several years. So now we're several years into the marriage. We were married in 93. Now it's 2001. We're starting the process. How many years is that? 8? 8 years I put it off. I found ways to put it off. I think some of the reasons why we didn't get pregnant was because I somehow rather knew I had to do that. But the other thing that was really interesting about us going out for doing this adoption was, and we ended up adopting on the same travel party as my wife's friend. So one of the interesting things about this is not only did I not want kids, but there was another story that happened before that when I thought if I ever do have kids, it'll probably be a girl and she'll probably be adopted. And I had a picture of the wife not being there for some reason, although that's not what really materialized in the journey. Although maybe it was because I had kind of compressed the divorce or whatever that's now happened into the story. I don't know for sure. Sometimes when you get these insights into things, they're symbolic and they're not necessarily skipped history or now recognized history. It could be that the symbols are starting to show up in certain ways. So being a now single parent of, she's 21, she can be independent. But my relationship with her was kind of the way it was when I had that thought about being a single parent with a daughter that was adopted. It was really interesting how it kind of came through. So there are a lot of other connecting the dots things that happened in my life. Again, I don't want to bore everybody with all the details, but when we went to the adoption agency offices in China, so we flew over everybody flew all together. We converged in Shanghai, China, and then we split up into 3 different travel groups to go get 3 different kids from 3 different orphanages in 3 different parts of China. We went south to Guangzhou, and we literally went straight from the airport to the adoption office, and they brought in the 3 kids that were meeting the 3 families, which we were one of there. And it was like because we recognized her instantly from the photos that we had, but we recognized her instantly. And the guy who didn't want kids, raced my wife to grab her. And when I grabbed her, sometimes I get a little teary-eyed thinking about this moment, because when I grabbed her, I felt an inversion, physical experience, like the universe turning inside out almost. And maybe it was that experience, because once she was in my arms, I realized I was no longer the center.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a pop in my ear, so like an audible, like in my left ear. I still remember that to this day, that accompanied that experience. Like it's almost like the universe kind of flipped itself around inside me and went back out. It was a surreal thing, but here I am now holding this little girl, and I am sold. I'm connected, and so some of that might be part of it. And then the other part of it is that at a certain point, I was becoming aware of the fact that I wasn't happy with who I was. I was starting to wake up to this thing. Like I just wasn't happy to begin with, and I was trying to figure out why I wasn't happy. So at first I thought it was about money. Well, that didn't fix anything. Then I thought it was about the toys. Well, that didn't fix anything. You know, there were lots of things I tried to do to be happy, but all these externally induced things weren't making me happy. And now I've got this beautiful little girl from China. I'm in love in a completely different way than I've ever been. Um, and my daughter, for whatever reason, the universe made sure that she and I were aligned in our interests and our energies. It was a very strange thing in some ways that I traveled halfway around the world to get a child who is more like a biological child could ever be in terms of this alignment, you know. So and so we liked science fiction together. I didn't make her interested in science fiction. We just found that she liked the things and that I would be happy to join her on these things. We did martial arts together for nearly 12 years, starting when she was 5 years old. The kind of bonding that actually made her mother a little bit envious. And to this day, my daughter will tell me things that either before or never tell her mom. Now, it seems to me now, as she's gotten older, there she may confide in her mother and other things. So, and since we're not married anymore, there may be some things that just aren't crossing over the communication line. But it was
Right.
it. So I'm not like sitting here glowing in the fact that I'm the first and only trusted party, and it's not that kind of arrogance or validation thing I'm just mentioning. I'm just sort of saying is that that's the kind of connection that came with her. And so as I was realizing how important she was to me, I was also realizing how important it was my impact on her. And so that was another form of awakening when I said, I want to be the kind of person that will make a difference in her journey in a positive way rather than a non-positive way. So in many ways, whether it's through martial arts or my coaching her through her math problems at school or whatever the case may be, in many ways, I grew up, and this is probably where I'm going to stop and let you control your show, but in many ways, that's where I grew up. That's where I became really aware. And also, I would say even martial arts to a degree, because martial arts teaches you about situational awareness, and it is a journey from here, from your head to your heart, because in martial arts, you need to have a compassionate posture and not a warrior posture, in my estimation. Or maybe what a true warrior is one that defines life as valuable, and it's not just in it for the fight. You know, it's like this. It's a different kind of. It's actually can be martial arts done in a healthy way can be a spiritual journey. So I would say is that there were probably awakening moments just from the martial arts as well, but doing these things and journeying with my daughter, I kind of grew up with my daughter. And I think seeing the world through her eyes even made me more aware of how I needed to be real, as opposed to this fake person that I had been traveling as for so many decades.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that it was multiple experiences throughout your life
Mhm.
where it's been a journey
Mhm.
to awakening. And I would say one of the awarenesses that I have recently developed is kind of that this is something that will continue. It's a never ending experience, and I I I can like consciously understand that there will be many other ways in which I haven't, that I will wake up in ways that I just am not even aware of at this moment.
That's a guarantee.
Yeah. So, well,
That's a
that's a
guarantee.
beautiful story,
Just
Brian.
like this thing I shared with you last night about the interaction with my family member. It's
Yeah.
like it it actually gave me pause to go, here I am, this person who's been very helpful in helping people release the clog of inauthentic experience and reveal and live in their authentic skin, and I just can't do this for my family member because maybe there are triggers in there or whatever the case may be. I really had to take in some, like, it got heated, and I'm gonna have to take responsibility for the fact that as much as I thought I was going to give him a compassionate way of examining this issue that he created for me by not honoring boundaries, that the gaslighter in him was not able to admit. And I didn't need him to admit he was wrong. I just didn't need the volatile response. He could have left in a huff and I would have been fine. But it probably was a few seconds away from blows in the parking lot, which unfortunately for him would not have been a good experience. But, and I'm not saying that with bravado. I'm just saying it's like when we were younger, my younger brother is slightly bigger than me, and he's also heavier than me and has been for quite a long time. When we were younger, we got into a fight when we were living together, another disaster. But and he, that size thing got him, it was an advantage.
Right.
So it was a physical thing. It was kind of turned into this like ugly wrestling match in the bathroom of all places. But it was like the but I have learned about my protection mechanisms from a different viewpoint rather than curling like up a ball, which I did then to keep from the brunt of that experience. And I'm in the parking lot and he's coming at me and I'm thinking he might have to go down,
Mm.
because he doesn't know he doesn't know. I've never shared with him. He doesn't know the training I've got.
Right.
He still thinks it was 40, 50 years ago. So
Right. Right. Well, thank goodness it didn't come to that.
yeah, but it was close.
Yeah.
It was close.
Well, I think we've all been there.
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about what you're doing now to serve people. Like you said, you're working on some books. You also, I imagine you helped me a lot with my projects and kind of getting my business off the ground. And what you're really good at is kind of hearing what I think might be a good idea, kind of letting me come up with the ideas. And then when I say, hey, I want to try this thing, you're like, yeah, let's do it. So do you find that, like, what do you do with what's your sort of I don't know, what is the expression, modus operatum, or
Modus operandi.
yeah,
um,
with modus operandi with the rest of people, like, I mean, what are you working on with everyone
oh
else?
gosh, what am I not working on?
Right.
So one of the reasons why the 3 books aren't finished is because I'm helping some of my clients finish their books.
Okay.
So, and there may be another one coming online in between, whatever the case may be. I do not a lot, I'm not as much as I used to. I do one-to-one coaching. Um,
Okay.
Part of doing one-to-one coaching is because I enjoy it. The other part of one-to-one coaching is it fits into the mission of my journey, which I will share in a little bit. And the other part about it is the one-to-one coaching experience yields insights into things that may become part of your next project or maybe even your next client meeting. I can't tell you how many times something comes up, like maybe something in this conversation will come up, and when I have it, and I do have another coaching session this evening, so when I go to that session, I'll suddenly go, oh, guess what we're going to talk about? you know,
Right.
because there's this thing about, since this is conversations with coaches, is one of the interesting things I've noticed in coaching is that we don't need to be 100% expert on everything. We just need to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of the person we're guiding.
Mhm.
And the reason why is maybe even 1 step is good enough. The reason why I say that is because just like I just said now, I might have just had an experience that becomes fruitfully important to the conversation of the person I'm coaching next conversation. Happens so many times it's not even funny. Like it's like I've come to the conclusion, and I'm a guy with a very large, deep engineering and science background in my training, nuclear power, electrical engineering, computer science, all these things were my college work and some Navy work and some other things I was doing. And and I even today I'm a very big fan of watching what goes on in the cosmos and what happens down at the particle physics level. And other than the math of that, I'm pretty well steeped on what's going on and why it's happening and what is the current prevailing thought. And sometimes I even go, I wonder if I could come up with a thought that would change the way they're looking at this problem. Like, I'm not acting as a physicist, but I often wonder, what if you were just somebody standing outside of the problem and going, it's soap suds, and then it turns out that's the answer to everything that's going on. So so anyway, I lost my train of thought for a second here. We were talking about, lost my train of thought. Help me out.
Talking about, well, we were talking about like working with other
Oh, we're working
people
with clients. So anyway,
yeah.
I digressed a little bit here. So anyway, one-to-one coaching. And despite my scientific background, I've come to really appreciate what I'm experiencing all the time, which is divine insertion into my journey, downloads, personal data that doesn't comply with science data. I'm still sometimes so steeped in data and the science of things that when somebody comes to me with a certain kind of journey work, I'm skeptical. I'm not cynical. Like, I'm never going to tell somebody I can't coach them because of this, or I'm not interested in hearing what they're talking about. It's just like, and I come to appreciate the fact that that's their personal data, and there may be cases where it won't actually work for me, but I can still guide them because I understand having that data that doesn't comply with science in this at least the same capacity of science that one might get used to if you were studying chemistry or physics or engineering or whatever the case may be. So so inside of that, I'm not always embracing, like when you come up with ideas, like, because you think about them I don't think you tell me about them right away. I think you think about them for like 2-3 days until your head's about to explode. And then you go, I've been thinking about this. I'm going, how about, that's a beautiful way to learn. Go for it. Do it. Like and you're always like, you're open to the adventure of thought. Whereas a lot of people, sometimes because they protected themselves, not necessarily the narcissistic way, but they protected themselves for so long that any new idea seems scary, and you at least open yourself to the adventure of it. So, and sometimes that seems a little bit male, female-ish in terms of the dividing line, but it's not 100% true. So um,
What do you mean?
it's like
Sorry, I'm not
maybe
following.
maybe in general, if I want to be generalistic, guys might be more open to the adventure of a new idea or a new thought, whereas women tend to be
Mm.
can be patternistically a little bit more uh, nesting or cocoon like transformation, as opposed to trying to test the waters of things. So
Oh, I see. Yeah.
but there are men who do what women do and women who do what men do. So I just want to say it's in broad strokes that can be, I won't even call it a truth, but it can be a spectrum of things where men tend to weigh in on one side of the spectrum and women on the other, but it's a fuzzy line.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
because I do have female clients who are very much open to adventure in the same way. So,
right. Well, it could also, I mean, it could be a lot of different factors, right? Whether a person's internally or externally focused,
mhm.
which, you know, it could be, that I know for me personally, I was externally focused for most of my life. So it's kind of the seeking to know myself outside of myself when I was walking around with the answer the entire time.
Right.
So
Well,
I've
that's a
been
beautiful
taking,
realization if you think about it.
yeah,
That's because my father was a seeker, but he was always looking for the answer on the outside.
yeah,
Although I should say that the man who painted the church might have found something.
well, yeah,
So, but the man I knew was always, in fact, he switched from Christianity to the Baha'i faith, back to Christianity. It's like, if he had probably talked to a Muslim, he would have been practicing Islam or following Islam for a while. I don't know. It's like he was
well,
definitely always searching for something to try to assuage the discomfort of his life.
that's the chameleon factor,
Mm-hmm.
blending in with whoever you are hanging out with at the time. And and that is like a tactic that I used as a way to try to know myself, to see what am I into, but then it could also be used as a way to manipulate people into getting what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's yeah, I don't know what that is, but I think going back to helping people with their ideas, I think that we have ideas inside us. We may be afraid to pursue them, and when it's brought up to you, you kind of say, well, let's do it. And that is actually part of coaching, is basically the the coach is the facilitator, and then the person ends up coaching themselves through the facilitation of powerful questioning and whatnot. So I appreciate that aspect of, okay, let's do it, because I kind of feel that there's like four stages to doing something, and there's the thinking stage where you're just kind of stuck in your own head, and then there's the talking stage, and that's where you start talking to other people about it, and it could eventually somebody just tells you to shut up and do it. So and
It's great. It's
so
great when we get to tell ourselves to do that. That's
yeah,
so we get
and
to that
so
place we go,
then
oh, Brian, shut up and just do it.
yeah. And the doing stage is it's the big one. It's the one where we have to keep falling down and getting back up off and dusting our knees off. And I believe that through that there's like a lot more thinking stages and talking stages, and then there's more doing. And eventually whatever that thing is reaches the fourth stage where you're just being that thing, and you're instinctually able to do that thing. And now you can focus that energy back into the other things that you're trying to do. So that's what's been great about this journey with you, is I've had a lot of ideas, and each one I'm taking one step at a time.
Well, that's an important thing. And just a real quick thing is that the value of doing things one step at a time can be the most fruitful way to be. So, and the reason why I say that is that many, many years ago, for a brief period of time, I went on to a sojourn into corporate. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. But I did a sojourn, a 10 plus year sojourn into corporate America. And toward the end of that tenure, the company changed leadership, and the new leader was the idea of the day guy. The whole company had to spin on the new idea every day. I'm surprised that company still exists today. I'm not there, but I'm surprised that company still exists today, because it was alarming how much damage that shape shifting that had to be done every day. And it was almost like everyone was an act of desperation. So not only was it was just energy draining to do that. So
Right.
so I would just say is pick one thing. When you get started doing anything, pick one thing, focus on that until you're good at it, and then pick something else to add to the process. So
Well, but yeah, and we have many different we have many different roles that we fill, many different things that we have to be doing.
mhm.
So, but yeah, if there's something specifically that's beyond what you need to do on a day-to-day basis, I think that's
Right, and I think
yeah.
things start to build in alignment as you're doing more and more things in alignment. Things it gets easier
Yeah.
to add new things. So like you're a parent, so all of a sudden your parenting stuff is showing up in your coaching, because you've been, whether they're 42 years old or 6 years old, it doesn't matter. Sometimes what you need to do to get somebody thinking about something, just ask the question of a 6-year-old or a 42-year-old and let their brain go to work, like so. So, so it, and vice versa. The more
Mhm.
adults we coach, the better parent we become.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have one more question for you. I want to know if you can tell me what actually, I mean, you told this beautiful story and you had all these mm, examples of your life and the experiences that you've had. But what was it? Where was it? I mean, was there a moment when you're like, "Oh, I want to start helping other people. I want to start coaching," or whatever it is that, what was there what made you make that transition?
Well, let's be careful with this one. I say that with a little tongue in cheek, but one of the things about people with fragile egos. Now, there's again, narcissism is one form of fragile ego behavior. Another form would be what people popularly call victim, of like an ongoing victim energy. They have fragile egos too, and they will do all kinds of things to medicate away the pain of that, exposing to fragile ego. And that's why it's entirely possible for narcissists to also be victims, because these energies are overlapping and kind of actually in broad strokes have similar things, where we are highly reactive energies who are not equipped to do the internal work, and therefore we find all the external things we can to ease the discomfort and to make our life very livable, but it's a
Okay.
survival thing. So imagine whether you're a narcissist or a victim, that you're always trying to please people to keep your image going, or your protection going, or some combination thereof. And often it comes out as validation, like I need to do this, and as soon as I get applause for having done this thing, then I feel validated. I'm going to get the picture fixed again. I feel validated, and that's what people popularly call people pleasing. Narcissists will do people pleasing because they want to be seen as charming, and so if I gave a gift or an opportunity or shared some thought, because I'm not saying narcissistic people are stupid. They have some diminished capacity in terms of being self-aware, but that doesn't make them stupid. So they know how to manipulate their environment, and they will be doing things pleasing people so that they can get more what they want, which is validation and affirmations of their greatness and their smartness, and their genius, and their superpowers at large. So anyway, I think there's even some science to back this up, that we are hardwired to serve. And when we're in that fragile ego state, the way we serve is ourselves. When we get awakened and we start to look at our lives in a much more self-aware way and start looking at these things, we start to become, once we get more exposed to our authenticity, we start to look at service in a different light, with or without recognition. And that layer of service is as unique as anybody's DNA. Like, there could be 100 life coaches, and each one could have a different approach to how they serve. So to truly answer the question, I believe, is just be aware what we serve or who we serve may define the quality of the service. And therefore, and then the other thing is I'm fairly convinced, based on how people get sick so easily, is that if you're a people pleaser, you're very likely to get physically sick because you're violating the tenet of that hard wiring to serve others.
Okay, you want to break that down a little bit?
I think it's a stressor on the system.
Okay.
I think since we are hardwired, I think it may be even a genetic property, but one way or the other, whether it's spiritual DNA, emotional DNA, mental DNA, physical body DNA, whatever it is, we are wired to serve. And you don't serve, failure to serve is at your own peril. Because I do believe some of our illness comes out of that failure to serve.
So you're talking about turning serving yourself to serving others because there's that need to serve at the core.
Yeah, although it shows up as people pleasing on one side of the spectrum and humanity changing or gift provision on the other side of it.
Well, there's the giving to get, and then there's the giving to give.
Yeah.
And here's
another thing, we could have a whole different conversation about this, but the healthy giving is also receiving. So I actually say any kind of giving is receiving, but sometimes if we give to manipulate, we're going to receive ugly stuff back. So but if we're truly giving out of love, again, this could be a whole 2-hour conversation all by itself. But if you're truly giving out of love, you will not only be giving to give, but you will also receive. And what I mean by that is things like this health thing I just dropped on you. Money, not in the sense of get rich quick or anything like that, but money has a different relationship with you when you're in a place of service than it does if you're just trying to make money, So and money can be one of those things that comes back to you in return for your ability to give. So ultimately, I think when we're talking about this shift from self-serving to serving others, we are adding elements of freedom to our journey. It's in the freedom that the body can breathe properly and disease happens less frequently.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think there's sort of it's I mean I think it covers even those 4 stages I was talking about. There's you eventually giving is who you are. It's what you do,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't even think about it. Like at first, there may be that feeling like, there's a very narcissistic way of giving, like to get, but you eventually reach a point where you're giving and you realize like that I actually am getting something from this because when I gave and I saw that smile on that person's face, it felt good. So you're getting this feeling like this feeling of, wow, that makes me feel good. But I think then it can even go beyond that where you're just not even thinking about it anymore. It's just something that you do
It can be a way
and
of
who you
life.
are.
It can be a posture. It can be baked in now. The more you practiced at it, and and yeah, I totally agree.
And I can see that for me with coaching, when it comes to wanting to, of course, we all need to survive. We all need to make money. And that's I noticed that that is a very difficult thing for a lot of new coaches is to charge what they're worth.
It's one of
There's
the
a lot of coaches,
number one problem is money,
yeah, they're
because
undercut themselves constantly.
but that's because of fear. It really is about fear.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and you know, um, we probably should do a whole different discussion on this particular subject. But the presence of fear is why they either won't charge or don't charge enough. They're afraid if they charge too much, the person's not going to want it or work with them. And all of this speaks about worth and other things that coaches are supposed to help others with. And so there was a time in my
Right.
life where I would never even look for a life coach because I recognized in everybody that I knew as a life coach that they couldn't get the hell their own way for their own life. So it was like it took me a long time to realize that there was room for brilliance and wisdom and learning and value inside of somebody who was still living a troubled life. And in fact, probably the more troubled their life had been on the journey, then maybe the more wisdom they would be carrying with them. Not always. It really kind of depended on how far they were from the fear based thinking to the love based posture. But one of the things that very common with life coaches, they're not very good with self care. So they don't end up with enough money in their journey. They don't end up with enough nutrition in their journey. They don't end up with enough, and nutrition could be also mental and emotional
Yeah.
and even spiritual nutrition. So they don't end up with enough of that. In fact, one of the things that's very common for coaches is they'll engage a coach to get to a certain place, and then out of hubris or fear or whatever else is going on, and basically hubris comes from fear anyway. Arrogance comes from fear, right? So so they don't want to learn anymore because they don't want to be perceived as not knowing their craft, yet they're not learning enough to get past this money challenge. So and I recognize this because I've been there along the way, where when I was the person that we briefly alluded to that was traveling with me when I first met you, when I
Mhm.
finally said I had money that I had tapped out for my divorce, and I said the plan was to use that money into investing it so we would build this amazing future in business, and you know and one of the things I think that took the wheels off the wagon in our relationship was that I said we have to start producing so that we don't go to zero on this in nest egg. It wasn't enough to last forever. It was a good chunk, and I think that just created in her a huge amount of fear
Yeah.
and pressure. And at that point, she needed a knight in shining armor with money that was going to last, not somebody who's going to put her to work. and that's not the language I want to say, is to put her to work and I would just sit back. We were supposed to do this together, but once that was a very clear indication of one of the things that went wrong. After all this traveling and closeness and talks until 5 a.m. and all these other things that we did that were just amazing, once the rubber hit the road and the money is not a forever thing unless I have to do my part, I think that just made her afraid, and she wasn't able to, there were other things. It wasn't just that, but that was one of the first things that happened, and she wasn't able to meet that thing because she got caught up in fear about the money instead of just saying, let's do what we're supposed to be doing and the money will follow. And
right.
And there's a certain amount of things that you have to have a place of trust that things will work out and the money will indeed follow.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong, even coming from two very scientifically minded people. There's nothing wrong with having a little bit of faith.
That's right. In fact, I would argue that trust was one of my key words. And the value of what happened in that relationship I was just describing is that I could no longer trust her. And it was just another relationship that I couldn't trust. And it really gave me more room to find the ability for me to trust myself more. Because that's if you can't trust yourself, you can't trust others. That's just a truth you can't ignore.
Well, yeah, you trust when we don't. So coming from somebody who was mostly externalized, if we don't, when we start performing or we start doing things for the world outside without having that focus inside, then it's a form of self-betrayal.
Yeah.
And then how could you trust yourself if you can't honor what you know in your gut? And so yeah, that's what you said is so true. And
well, that phrase you use, self-betrayal, that's not an intentional act. It could be that's a reactionary thing, self-betrayal. So if I'm now afraid, I may do something that's going to still ultimately not serve me. That's a betrayal of sorts. Because I'm afraid of this, whatever it is. And the fear may not even be warranted. It's just it's unknown, or or it may be attached to other things like I don't want to be seen as a crazy person, or because sometimes when you're doing this kind of work, you're going to have to step off the plank of pure logic.
right.
And just kind of this feels like the right thing to talk about or suggest, or and so you have to kind of suspend your relationship with fear in order to serve in a healthy way.
Right. And so I mean, all of that is going back to my 4 stages, is the doing stage. I believe that where that encounter you had, that relationship, whatever, was where the problem started, if I'm correct, is you were stepping into the doing stage, whereas someone else was stuck on the talking stage. Like I have a bookshelf full of self-help books that I've read.
You
but
hit
I
it on the
haven't
head.
actually.
And actually, steps 1 and 2 were probably, she was always taking copious notes and learning something new, but never putting it into action.
Yeah.
And when she did, it seemed to be, without trying to sound like I'm being judgmental, when she did, it seemed to be safe. And it was never really about the leap that one needs to be able to stretch to actually be a leader, to be a healthy coach.
Well, I was having a conversation with one of my coach friends before this conversation, and we were talking about every step has had a little bit of fear, anxiety riding with it. And I mean, every stage of this that I've been through in the past year and a half, getting my coaching certificates and all these new, it's not even been a year and a half, it's been about a year, and trying out these new ideas with you, that's been terrifying. It just keeps
You
getting
never showed
easier.
me. I mean, there was some. I did see some anxiousness once in a while, but you never really showed that to me. Let me just show you how it would show up. It would be kind of a level of perfectionism, like
Mhm.
not letting any blemishes happen or whatever. You've gotten more relaxed over time, but it was just in the beginning. It was like, how do I show up? What do we got to do? And now I think you're calmer. I think you still try to sometimes go for perfection, but like I'm sitting here fixing my camera during the thing is I do that on my own
I was I
shows.
was
I'm
I
doing
was
that on my own
laughing
shows, and
because
it's like,
I keep pestering you about the intro to the show. It's blurry. So yeah,
so
if we let these, trying to get everything right is not how you get anything done. You get it right by actually doing it wrong a lot of times, over and over and over again.
yep, there's plenty of people. You have that. What is it, the Michael Jordan story where you know 4,000 missed shots before he was able to start humping 3-point shots or doing
Right, right.
2-point shots or 1-point foul shots or whatever the case may be. So so you know um, it's in the doing we get better. That's for sure. I mean, there's a certain amount of research we can do to collect some ideas, and if we've already gotten a certain amount of practice, we can bring new ideas very quickly into what we're doing. We still got to try them out. In my case, about 500 to 2,000 rides in the car allowed me to fine tune. So the doing was just going out there and spitting it out and seeing what the reactions were, or what the responses were, and
Right.
and then finding that, and even the early stuff wasn't wrong. It's just I realized there were some things I could do to make it even tighter, better. But if I had, you know, if I had decided that as a hypnotherapist that I shouldn't be driving in a Lyft or Uber or whatever the different ride shares are that are out there, because it would have been inconceivable for somebody with my training and history as a business person and all that other stuff to do that, then I might have allowed that to be affect at me at the ego level. Like, oh, why would I want to look? I think if I had an opportunity to do janitor work for a day or so, I would learn something about myself and others in the process. It's not, there's no job that should be considered less than. There's no
Right.
role in society we considered less than. One time, I have friends of mine, they just recently sold it, but my friends are friends of mine and they own a Mexican restaurant. In one of their earlier locations, by the way, the Mexican family made the best chicken franchise I've ever had. And
Okay.
so I said, I will come work the kitchen on a Wednesday 3 times for you to share with me your triple top secret recipe to how to make your chicken franchise. So I did. So I had an ulterior motive to get this recipe, which, by the way, when I make it, it's still the best chicken franchise on earth. But but it turned out I got a lot more out of it than there was something that happened in the kitchen there, engaging the people who were bringing me the dishes, making sure that they were cleaner than I would never let anybody dine on a. I have a style about me, and it also kind of brought me back to when I was 16 years old, and my first job was as a dishwasher in a cafeteria. I had a giant machine I would load up, but I would make sure that nobody ever got debris on their plate ever. So it kind of brought all this sort of full circle stuff back, but at the same time, there was new ideas, new perspective, and I ended up having a completely different level of engagement that I would have at 16 years old, working in this kitchen in my late 40s or
Chicken
so.
franchise.
to get my chicken
You know
franchise.
what? I don't even know if I know what chicken franchise is.
It's just an Italian breaded chicken with lemon and cream and butter, lots of butter.
Oh,
And
so it's Italian?
it's Italian.
So
It's Italian, yeah.
okay, so but this was a Mexican restaurant.
Yep, but they were making. It was not even on the menu. It's just something
Oh,
that
okay.
we found out that they made. We had ordered it, and it's amazing. And in many ways, they just sold the restaurant, and the new people don't have the same recipes, and it's already
Mm,
not as good. I don't have to go there to find that out because my ex-wife and my daughter both said you don't want to go back. It's not good,
dang.
and
Maybe it's maybe
I trust their opinion.
they're like,
Yeah.
we just don't want to let Brian know.
That's possible. Excuse me, everybody. I have a little allergy or something here today. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, where was I going with that whole story about chicken franchise? So the idea here is that we open ourselves up to experiences. They don't always have to be linearly aligned with the direction of where we're going. It's like I think that as much as I feel I was a very good coach, and I do business coaching, leadership development work, hypnotherapy, all these other things that are included in the course of my work. um, and as you may recall, I've invited you to join me on this no-cost mastermind I have for entrepreneurial launchpad type experience, and a host of other things that are going on in the process of how I show up to serve. And one of the things I think was when I did that ride in the ride share stuff to make those interviews happen, as much as I am confident in my abilities and things like that, I still think it made me a better coach because you get to meet people where they are when they're in your car going from home to work or work to home or out to meet somebody, and they'll share stuff with you. I'm going on a blind date, or I just came from my mom's funeral, or whatever the case may be, and you share things that might not be shareable even if you'd known them for 50 years or 10 years
Right.
or whatever. Even if they for some reason they'll share stuff with you because you're a stranger they might never see again.
Yeah. It's a little mini form of
Therapy.
therapy or coaching.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it made me a better being. So so what could I encourage somebody to do that? Don't do it for the money. It won't work out. You'll just be trading your car's value for the money. You're just churning cash out of your car. So just take my word for it. Rideshare doesn't, you'll get some short-term cash, but you're taking it right out of the value of your car.
Absolutely.
So, but if you're going to do it to meet people, study people if you want to. If you're going to do it like I did, test some of your material. If you're doing it just to be there for people who, I had somebody in my car who once I had taken them, because of the way I talk to people, it's like, how was your day? What was the best part of your day? All that kind of stuff. I had one guy sat there and says, if it wasn't for this conversation, I want you to know I was going someplace to kill myself. Like, these kinds of things happen because of meeting somebody where they are instead of just taking care of yourself. And, anyway, I could talk all day long about this stuff, but since this is conversation with coaches, I want to say healthy coaching is nonlinear.
That's true. Well, you had mentioned some of the things you're doing. I am going to, in the description of this video, put in a way for people to contact you. But how would you, how would you like people to reach out to you if they want to find you? Where should they go to find out more information on you?
Oh, okay. Well, in broad strokes, if you want to, like I just kind of touched I'm actually part of an international networking group, all these other things as a leader in the networking group. So there could be many things that are not on this thing, but if somebody just goes to briankbaird.com, they'll get exposed to much of what I just said in terms of how I serve.
Okay.
And even somebody could schedule a meeting with me if they want to. So,
Okay. And I'll put
I-
all that information, like I said, in the
yeah,
notes.
yeah. I mean, there's lots of websites attached to my work, but that's kind of like the front end of accessing all of them. If somebody doesn't mind getting a little bit overwhelmed by how much I can share, do to serve, then come take a look. That's where they can start there. So can I say something here though? I wanted to add something here about this thing.
Absolutely.
I want everybody to know that as much as we've journeyed together and you've given me the honor of being a guidepost for some of the things you're doing, without naming any names, I've had a very dear person in my journey referred over to you to coach, because that's how much confidence I have in you. And so people need to know that you're not a newbie. You're just, the show may be a newbie experience here, but you're not a newbie in terms of coaching. Although we're all works in progress, and you're definitely evolving. And I love the content you're putting out on social media that sort of is very, very valuable for people. So, so you're the real deal, and I want everybody to know that. So,
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Well, I was just wondering, do you have any final words, anything else that you want to put out there?
I could use my sign off for, actually, I have a couple of video casts I do too, which I didn't mention, but I could do a sign off for The Effective Way if you want me to do that for your show, and let you have a
Oh,
sign
you
off.
can do that. Well, you can do that when we sign off. I mean,
Okay.
are you planning on coming back?
Yeah, anytime you want me to, anytime.
Yeah.
I feel like when you and
And
I talk, we really discuss really valuable things that
people can find our conversations on our other show, Dead Guys Talking, where I feel like we started to really fall into our groove with the last few videos.
Right. Well, I mean,
So
some of it was we were creating the show and we were putting that out there at the same time. So it's like, that was really an interesting thing that we've been doing. I don't know if that's something you wrapping up, or we're going to continue that or not. I don't know what's happening with that, but it has led to this. Even though this is your inaugural show, I know you will do many of these. So,
well, I do see room for there to be more Dead Guys Talking shows. Because in those shows, it can kind of be, it's not focused on just one person, where it's kind of, hey, we're just all getting together and we're talking. And there could definitely, I could see there being specific conversations on specific topics discussed within that show. So yeah, we'll figure that out. But yeah, so I really appreciate you being my first guest. And
well, as I said, it was not the honor's mine. So to even be included in the consideration, that was just, thank you. So,
yeah. Well, why don't you take the honors and do the sign off? And
okay. Well, I'll use the sign off for The Effective Way, which is wherever your journey takes you, may it be a fantastic life.
that's beautiful.
So,
and I hope everybody stays healthy and happy and enjoys their journey as well. Thank you so much, Brian.
It's my pleasure. Everybody keep well, and Dustin and I will obviously be talking to you soon.
Okay. Take care, man. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my show. Oh God, let's start over. I'm sorry. What did I say the first time?
I don't know.
Oh,
I'm
it's so
just here.
weird. I
I'm
feel
just
so
in the
put on the
moment now.
spot.
So we'll do it one more time. Otherwise, you get to keep all this. Actually, now that we have these two outtakes, you'll play them later on.
Yeah.